Welcome back to class. Today we're going to be talking about the growth of the colonies. At the start of the colonial period, when the Spanish, Dutch, Swiss, French, and English were establishing their colonies, the colonists were mostly lower class individuals looking for a new start, or they were explorers working for their government, a monarch, or a business such as the Dutch East India Trading Company. When the colonies were first getting started, their future looked bleak. There were even some colonies that either folded up or just ceased to be, like the tiny colony of Roanoke. The main hardships of these early colonies was a lack of food and illness. The sea crossing, especially for those who had not spent much time at sea on a ship, the journey itself took a massive toll on both their mental and physical health. And so illness was a major factor in the decline in population in the early colonies. It wasn't until Native Americans taught the colonists how to farm the land properly that they began to prosper. As time passed, England gained more and more control in the colonies, from what is present day Maine all the way down to Georgia. And by the mid 18th century, England controlled the Dutch colonies of New York and Pennsylvania and the Swedish colonies of Delaware and New Jersey. In the northern colonies, the colonists became dependent on industries such as fishing, whaling, and shipbuilding. Farming was still a part of life in the early colonies for the ones in the north. However, the northern rocky soil and the short growing season in these northern colonies made growing large crops difficult. Still, in the northern colonies, every 9 out of 10 people were farmers. And it was not unheard of for families to have 15 to 20 children. The middle colonies became known for their crops of wheat, oat, barley, and rye. And unlike the New England colonies, the middle colonies had a larger growing season, and their land was much richer and more suitable for growing crops. And this is what made it possible for them to grow larger, more sustainable crops. In addition to the crops, the middle colonies were also known for their cattle, sheep, and pigs. They were also home to industries such as paper mills, iron foundries, and glass works, which became well known and sought after in Europe. So by the mid 18th century, the middle colonies could rival New England in manufacturing and trade in their respective industries. While the New England colonies relied on the sea to provide for them and to build their economy, and while the middle colonies relied heavily on their manufacturing as well as their crop production, the southern colonies relied heavily on crop production and eventually on slave labor. Unlike the small family-run farms of the New England colonies, who relied on large families or hired hands to help run the farms, rich southern landowners sought other alternatives to working their large farms and plantations. At first, the rich southern plantation owners relied on indentured servants from Europe to work their vast plantations. And eventually, Even the first Africans who were brought to the U.S. came as indentured servants, who, after a period of time, were free to make their own way and own their own land. However, by the early 1700s, using indentured servants was proving to be too impractical for the plantations in the South. And this was due largely in part to the fact that every few years, one group of workers would leave, and the larger farms and plantations in the South would have to purchase new indentured servant contracts and go through the process of training these new indentured servants. And it was a cycle that was repeated over and over and over. And so it was bothersome, or could have been considered bothersome, to train the new hands every few years. And so the South started looking for another way to have the large workforce that was required to run the farms and large plantations. And so they took a page out of the Spanish colonies in South America and the Caribbean, who used mainly slave labor. And this is when slavery slowly starts coming into the southern colonies of the original 13. And they justified it by being much easier to just keep the same workers who would eventually have children, whom then could be trained by their parents as they're growing up to do same job. And so gradually, southern colonies like Virginia made it legal to own slaves. And so gradually, indentured servitude in the South lessens and lessens, and slavery becomes, or slave labor becomes, the norm. And it becomes so much a part of the Southern economy that it becomes a major factor in the Southern economy. So much so that many of the Southern plantation owners believed that if they were to do away with slavery, like many of the Northern colonies wanted to do once they came together and started trying to form a nation, that they believed that the Southern economy would crumble. That's how dependent on slavery the Southern colonies became. And slavery was one of the things that caused tension between the Southern and Northern colonies. And this tension can be seen not only in the colonial period, but also during the formation of the United States. So we've looked at the Northern, the Middle, and the Southern colonies, and England has gained control of all of them. But what was the purpose? What was the plan behind England doing this? Well, England's original plan was, or thought process, was that once they had control of all of the colonies along the North American coast from Maine to Georgia, was that they would be able to receive all of the raw material from the colonies, and then the different factories, craftsmen, and companies would refine the raw product. For example, instead of tobacco farmers growing, harvesting, and processing the tobacco leaf, the farmer would just grow the leaf, harvest it, dry it, and ship it to England, where it would then be processed and turned into product such as pipe tobacco and cigars. However, tensions began to rise whenever the colonies started to grow and produce their own craftsmen. They started to build their own businesses, and the farmers and the plantation owners figured out that they could make even more money if they did everything themselves. And so this creates tension between the colonies and England. But trade with England and Europe was not the only trade going on. And it would, in the economy in the colonies wouldn't have flourished as much if it was only dependent on trade between Europe and the colonies. What really helped the colonial economy grow and flourish was they had trade with each other. And this came whenever they started building roads. And how they did that was they took the original Native American trails and built them up into roads and connected the colonies, and that allowed for easier trade between the different colonies along the eastern coast. But this also, with them trading with one another, it also helped, it not only boosted the economy and strengthened it, but it also strengthened the alliances between the colonies, which would later on lead to them being able to better come together, even though they were very much separate, come together to form a union, or the United States, which we'll be talking about a little later on in this course. So this was just a brief introduction to this week's topic of growth in the colonies. Please make sure that you do the readings and you watch the videos, and there'll be some other lectures for you to watch as well. But I hope this introduction was helpful, and look forward to seeing what y'all discover and learn about the growth of the colonial economy up into the French and Indian War. God bless.